Happy Friday. Nice to have you here. Thank you for joining me at 10 o'clock Eastern on this Friday night. So I did not expect, because things have been so quiet in Oklahoma, that we were going to get some big news tonight. But we got huge news tonight. All along, we've been waiting for the police or any authorities there to give us some kind of update about those missing moms. And tonight we got it from a source close to the investigation. It is not good news. It is not the news anybody was expecting or wanted to hear. But it does involve evidence in that car, blood evidence in that car, evidence outside that car, blood evidence outside that car, and a theory from the source on exactly what happened to these two women outside that car. I have all of that coming up for you as well. But then blockbuster information as well about the custody battle. Man, is there information coming out in that custody battle. We've been talking about the transfer of the kids being the reason the two women were traveling. But these two here, Veronica and Wrangler, this was a mess. What was going on, but the salvos going back and forth between them. But Wrangler's mom, Grandma, there's news on her tonight. Death threats she made against her own kid. Court documents, we got them all. You're going to hear it all in a moment. And then we're in the eve of an anniversary. I had to sort of do the math again. 21 years ago. 21 years ago, Lacey Peterson and her unborn son, Connor Peterson, surfaced in the San Francisco Bay, which means Connor would be 21. And as we sort of process how long that's been, Scott Peterson, her husband, Connor's father, has been sitting in prison. But in a couple of days, one of the most significant hearings that he has ever had. It's a hearing about new evidence that just might get him a new trial. And folks, we ain't the same America that we were 21 years ago, which means his jury, totally different. Not immersed in the cable circus that was Scott Peterson. What would that mean? Got all that coming up with his lawyer who represented him in that trial. And then also in Milwaukee, what is happening in Dahmer's former hometown? I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer's hometown. Milwaukee hasn't had a grisly Dahmer story since Dahmer's grisly story. But severed parts are showing up all around town. A severed leg in a beautiful park, and then more body parts throughout the city. It's a 19-year-old girl so far, but some of the body parts we're not sure. So tonight on the show, Dahmer's former investigator going to weigh in on what's happening in that town and whether people there should be concerned. All that coming up in just a few moments. Let's start here. April 17th is only 5 days away. It might not be on your calendar. It wasn't on mine, but it was looming huge for Veronica Butler. She was scheduled to be in court to settle a bitter custody fight with the father of her two kids, a guy named Wrangler Rickman. But it is looking less and less likely that Veronica's going to make that date, because she and her friend Jillian Kelly are still missing, technically in Oklahoma or Kansas, and it's really starting to look like it is much worse than just missing. We have a lot of new exclusive information to unpack tonight about the search for the women, the custody battle at the center of it, and the evidence. NewsNation has learned what it was that made police believe foul play is at stake here after discovering the women's abandoned car 1,000 feet off the main road. A source close to the investigation tells us that they came across blood mixed in the dirt around that abandoned car. The source also says they found a small amount of blood inside that car. And then there's this. The source goes further, telling us what no one wanted to hear, that investigators believe the women were shot outside of that abandoned car. Veronica and Jillian vanished on March 30th, and that's almost 2 weeks ago tonight. They were driving from their rural Kansas home to the Oklahoma Panhandle. They were scheduled to pick up Veronica's kids. Jillian was reportedly along for the ride for support and safety, because Veronica's custody battle was particularly ugly, especially with the kids' paternal's grandma. Wrangler Rickman's mom, the grandma, had custody of these kids while Wrangler himself was in jail and then in rehab. And Veronica was supposed to pick them up to spend the weekend together with them. She was not headed to Grandma's house for that exchange. Instead, that's the spot right there. This is where the exchange was supposed to happen. It is bizarre. An abandoned gas station. It's in court records. This was the designated location. Dangerous. Veronica and Jillian vanished before that exchange could take place. And since then, there has been a deafening silence from law enforcement, and no visible search is underway for these women or their bodies. While we don't know much of anything about the investigation because they're so tight-lipped, we know a lot more about the custody war. It all started in 2015 when Veronica Butler and Wrangler Rickman were dating. They had a son that year, and then they had a daughter in 2018. But they split up soon after that, and they shared custody. But then in 2021, Veronica was awarded sole custody. And a year later, Wrangler complained that Veronica moved around and changed jobs too much without notifying him, and that she'd made unsubstantiated complaints about him to the police. The court believed Wrangler, and they awarded him full custody. But then, last year, Wrangler got in a bit of trouble with the law. Last November, that father was charged with having a gun, but he was a felon, so that's a problem. He was sentenced to 6 years of probation, and this year, in just February, a couple months ago, Wrangler was arrested and charged with public intoxication and domestic assault and battery in the presence of minors. Big. His probation, understandably, was revoked, and he was sent back to jail. But the kids who were with him that did not go back to their mom, they went to his mom instead, Grandma, Wrangler's mom. Why? According to a source who has seen the court documents, Wrangler's mom told the court that Veronica's brother had sexually abused the kids. And that is a very serious accusation, especially in family court. And the judge gave that grandma full custody. We've heard conflicting reports about the investigation into that allegation about the brother being sexually abusive. We've heard yes, we've heard no, but we haven't found anything to substantiate either side. But in the same documents, Veronica's ex, Wrangler Rickman, admits that his own mother made him say and do things against his will, and that she threatened him. Here's a quote. Rickman further stated that he had been threatened numerous times by his mother, that she would kill him, quote, shoot him in the head if he didn't do what she told him to do. Wrangler was released from jail last month and then was ordered to go into a no-contact rehab where he is, by all accounts, he's still sitting there tonight. Then about a week later, Veronica and Jillian went missing. I want to bring in NewsNation national correspondent Nancy Liu. She is live in this area in Oklahoma tonight. She's on the location. Okay, Nancy, it's just earth-shattering to hear about blood found in the car and outside the car. Are we learning anything else?
It is disturbing information, but that is what a source is telling NewsNation producer Allison Weiner. That source saying that police suspect the two women were shot, and that the evidence at the scene where the car was abandoned, that it does include blood inside and outside of the car. According to Allison Weiner, that's why the police were using metal detectors at that scene to look for gun casings. What happened to the women remains a mystery, though, Allison. Ashleigh, I did finally get to speak with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations today. They are not saying much at all about this investigation, but they did tell me that they are still looking to find the women. Also, that they are searching other locations. Where those locations are, they're not saying, or why. So there's still a lot we don't know about this investigation, but I got the sense that it is progressing, and we do not know yet if this custody case is definitively part of the investigation.
I want to be really clear, Nancy, whenever I work on these stories and a source tells us something, it's oftentimes something they've heard in the halls or in hearsay or in chatter with colleagues, and it might be a game of telephone. It is possible there was blood found in the car and that somebody asked the question, maybe they were shot. So we should be really cautious as a team about the source's information about that, because it's entirely possible that that did not happen. It's just something that was said by a source. So just want to be really, really cautious, because man, that is it's super upsetting. And I also want to ask you about Wrangler Rickman, the dad in this case, who went to prison and then ended up in rehab. By all accounts, it seems like he's been in rehab, so he's got a pretty solid alibi here. But he got married.
Yeah.
Who knew? He got married last year. That new wife is already estranged, and there's a story to her as well. What is she saying about everything that's going on?
Yeah. We learned that Wrangler Rickman got married in July. And by February, he was charged with a domestic violence allegation. And by February, we know that his new wife left Oklahoma. She indicated on social media that she left Oklahoma for safety reasons. And she also indicated that there was domestic abuse as the reason that she left Rickman. She kind of alluded to Veronica going through the same thing. She has an idea of what happened with Veronica. She didn't want to speculate online, but we do know through her social media posts that she's been talking with law enforcement. So law enforcement not telling us who they're talking to, but she is among the people who have talked to OSBI, and according to her, she's told them everything she knows.
Well, I really wonder, what she knows. Being an estranged wife of Wrangler Rickman, who at this point we think, is again a solid alibi. If he was in jail or at, rehab, that doesn't necessarily point to him. But there's been so much talk about people who fear Grandma, and that court document I read gave me the willies. And I'm just going to reread it real quickly. Wrangler said this in a court document, stated that he'd been threatened numerous times by his mother, that she would kill him, shoot him in the head if he didn't do what she told him to do. Is it expected that this estranged wife has a lot more color and detail and can fill in some blanks about Grandma?
She didn't want to elaborate on social media. She mentioned how the families are reading everything on social media, but a lot is being said about Grandma. Now, where the two kids are, we don't know, because Grandma had custody because Wrangler was incarcerated and now he's in rehab, and Veronica doesn't have custody, and she's missing. So OSBI has only said that the kids are safe, but we don't know where they are.
It's just distressing as all get out. This is when public records are pretty helpful and secrecy is not, given the fact that there are two little innocent kids who could be in danger, whoever it is they are with, in the midst of this awful, awful story. Nancy Liu, great digging out there. Break into the show if you find out anything.
Though,
thank you. Go ahead.
Ashleigh, we know that court hearing was coming up. On the custody hearing is April 17th. That's next Wednesday. And we've learned that Veronica was planning to ask for full custody now that she's more settled in Kansas and she had opened a business. And now that she's, staying in one place, life together, she was going to ask for full custody.
And that is a volatile time in family court and custodial disputes. Nancy Liu, great reporting. Thank you for that. I now want to bring in Phil Waters. Phil is a former Houston police detective and an expert in suspect interviews. He's worked hundreds of cases, achieving a 96% clearance rate. By my account, that makes you a great guest. So blood in the car, a source tells us, Phil, blood in the car, blood outside the car. As a homicide detective, what would that, and again, our source also saying they believe that the women were shot outside the car. As a homicide detective, what do you make of that?
Well, you just can't script this stuff, can you? Thanks for having me back, Ashleigh. I will tell you the indications that we know now. You're talking about blood inside in the dirt, blood possibly inside the car. There's no, at this point, unless they've got some firearms evidence that's there that would indicate there was a shooting that did take place. And we talked the last time about the possibility of two people being involved in this or one person with a gun. So I think this information that's coming out, it makes sense to me that if we go with the one person with a gun, they can control two people very easily, and something went wrong. If that means that one of the women tried to take the weapon away or tried to flee or tried to start the car and take off, and whatever happened that caused this suspect to discharge that weapon and hit at least one of the women. Now, my question would be, if we have blood inside the car, blood outside the car, I would imagine that the DNA testing that's going on now is to determine is the blood coming from the same source. So that's going to be a key question that gets answered in the processing.
And I keep thinking, ever since this news broke and we learned this from our source, I just keep thinking about the kids, because the kids technically could have been there. Now, they didn't make the transfer to our knowledge. So perhaps this was before they even got near the kids and the kids never saw anything. But dear God, I hope the kids weren't in that car. Tell me a little bit about the fact that there's no visible searching going on at all, not for missing women and not for bodies. We can't find hide nor hair of any crews anywhere doing any looking.
Well, this is my pure speculation here, but that indicates to me that they know that type of a search is not necessary. So that means that they're interviewing everybody that they can tie to this event. The current estranged wife and then the mother, I'm sure they've interviewed the mother. Now, you got to understand, these people are submitting to these interviews. Hopefully they are doing that. If they say, look, I'm done talking to you, that's the end of it. So I appreciate the fact that I think the detectives are really being very methodical, and they're walking very patiently toward bringing this to a resolution. And I just, the kids, I think your reporter just said that that OSBI has said that the kids are safe. So that makes me wonder, in cases like this, typically the first move is that CPS moves in and gets the kids out of the potential dangerous situation. But so,
and we haven't been told that. We haven't been told that, Phil.
Right. So I would have to say that they must be in a place where authorities are comfortable that they are safe. We just don't know where that place is.
The FBI, it is now confirmed the FBI is there in a major assistance role. But I wondered what kind of assistance. I get it, there's a lab at Quantico. I get it, they have data analysts. I get it, they have extra field staff they can help to do, conduct interviews. But can the FBI also help to conduct surveillance? And I'm just imagining, if Grandma is such a character that is, dictated in these court documents, can they run some pretty sophisticated surveillance on her?
Well, that's true. The FBI, in my experience with them, and we've brought them into kidnappings and those types of investigations, the resources that they have go beyond the resources that most other departments do have, and especially in this area where you're talking about very, very small sheriff's offices and so forth. Yeah. So, they're going to be able to provide manpower. They're going to be able to provide analysis. They're going to be able to provide whatever when they process that car, process that scene, anything that they remove from that scene will be processed in the FBI lab or possibly the state lab, but I'm betting that it's going to go to the FBI. And, of course, they can, there's surveillance equipment, surveillance personnel, digital tracking. Anytime we don't know that they've not gone in and taken computers. And so they're doing forensic analysis on the computers. So there's a lot of things that the FBI brings to the table as just a matter of resource.
I got to wrap it there, but the story's not over, so I'll have you back. Phil Waters, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate it.
Love having Phil on. Okay, so listen, if you lived through the early 2000s, you couldn't turn on your TV or open a newspaper without being blasted by Scott Peterson headlines. His murder trial led the Larry King Show every night, and his story was above the fold at every breakfast. Larry's gone, and so is your morning paper, but brace yourself because Peterson is back, and he might just be getting a brand new trial in California. All of this as the grim anniversary of Lacey and Connor surfacing in the San Francisco Bay is literally just hours away. The lawyer who defended him is next, with the chances that this might actually happen. Lacey Peterson's baby boy, Connor, would be 21 years old now. In the eyes of the law, he'd be a full adult. And I'm going to give you a minute to let that sink in. Lacey and her husband, Scott, were going to name their child Connor. But Lacey, 8 months pregnant, was murdered. She went missing Christmas Eve, 2002. And she wasn't found until the following April. Her body and the baby's body were found one day apart in the San Francisco Bay 21 years ago this weekend. Scott Peterson got the death penalty for Lacey and Connor's murders, later reduced to life without parole, and he's been in prison ever since. But now he has his best shot ever at getting a new trial and just maybe a whole different verdict. The LA Innocence Project is demanding that the state look at evidence that either never saw daylight or was mishandled in Peterson's original trial. Evidence like a burned out van found close to Peterson's home the day after Lacey disappeared. There were blood stains in that van, but was the blood Lacey's? Nobody knows. And the investigator who found it says nobody ever really even asked him about it. And there's other new evidence that Scott's new lawyers say warrants a new trial. And a judge, for now, is letting the appeal move forward. Peterson's already had one hearing last month, and he's got another one in just a couple of days. So I want to bring in Scott's original defense attorney, Mark Garagos. He's a legendary trial attorney. He's co-host of the Reasonable Doubt podcast with Adam Carolla. And I also want to welcome to NewsNation for the first time on camera, Brian Spitulski. He is a former Modesto Fire Department inspector who did a full workup on that burned out van way back in 2002. Welcome to both of you. And Brian, thank you for being on the show. It's good to have you on the network for the first time. Can I just ask you about the van fire? It's Christmas Day, 2002. You get a call about the van fire and you find a stained mattress. Tell me a little bit more about your discoveries.
There's a little bit of time frame in between the two events. The Christmas Day discovery, I just recovered the van. We took it to a secured area and held it until I was going to do a more in-depth fire investigation that didn't take place on Christmas Day. I wanted to get the engine company out of the alleyway where we were. We weren't in a good area. So we took the van to where you're seeing it now, a secure facility. It wasn't until a couple days later that I kind of tied this together with a news report that there was a van similar to this, kind of tied to the Lacey disappearance. And I called up my Modesto police detective who's assigned to our arson unit. And we went and looked at it, and we ended up bringing it into the Modesto police evidence locker and doing a full dig out of processing of the van, where we discovered the mattress in the back with a blood stain on it. And that's kind of how it went forward.
Okay, now tell me the discrepancy about testing those stains and what kind of blood results came back.
I can only tell you what I was involved in. So the first test, I physically tested it. I put it into the luminol, and it had a test positive, a presumptive for human blood. It turned blue. And then we took it up to the Department of Justice, where they ran another test on it. And their test came back negative, I found out later. But and then there's been multiple tests done to that same fabric, different samples, but from that same fabric that you're seeing right there. And they've all tested positive for human blood and for human DNA.
So, I mean, look, Mark Aragos, I hear that. And if I'm you, my blood is boiling. Were you ever aware of any of this, even the little fire that happened in a van not far from Lacey's home?
The whole thing is mind-boggling to me. I mean, in fact, I would like to ask Brian, who was the detective who you talked to from Modesto PD?
He was assigned to our arson unit. I choose not to give out his name. There's a report authored by him and by others from the Modesto Police Department, but he has since retired, and I don't want to bring him into it, but there is evidence. This piece of evidence is retained by the Modesto Police Department, and there are reports generated by the Modesto Police Department regarding this. And I know that the fire report was somewhere in discovery, along with some very small thumbnail photos of my fire scene in black and white, small enough that they're very hard to understand what the photos are. But I do understand those were in I think it was 40,000 pages of discovery you had to go through.
Yeah, that was what was dumped on us mid-trial, so I assume it's part of that document dump. When you say thumbnails, how small are we talking?
I would say maybe 2 inch by 1.
Pretty, and black and white?
Yes, sir.
And did anybody ever, you also mentioned that there were tests that were done after the DOJ's test. Your luminol test came back positive?
Yes, sir. And actually this had kind of bothered me for a while because the DOJ test came back as a negative, but I physically tested one sample and it was blue, tested positive or presumptive positive for human DNA or human blood. And then I want to say it was 2015, I was called up by an investigative reporter, and he wanted to talk to me about this, and he presented the color photo of me holding that sample. And it was shocking because it made me feel finally this is being understood. And it was sometime after that the other DNA tests were done on the sample. I don't know exactly what the dates were, who requested them, how they got done, or what their full results were. Just that it sure has gotten everybody's attention now.
Well, and understandably so. And the investigative reporter, do you remember who that was?
Mike Gugdell, Gugdell.
Garagos, can I ask you something just about the upcoming hearing in just a couple of days? All of the things that Brian Spitulski is saying right now, it astounds me that we're 21 years later and we're just sort of digging at these extraordinary details. Are they I would imagine they have tested this by now. If they're coming into a hearing next week, will the tests have been done? Will we have a mystery solved by next week?
Well, remember what happened, Ashleigh, at the last hearing. Dave Harris, who was one of the trial lawyers sitting next to Birgit, asked for 90 days. The judge said no. There is a Court of Appeals proceeding that was pressed pause on in response to the Innocence Project investigation. And the judge said, no, we're going to keep this on a tighter leash, so to speak, and only gave him a little less time. I would love to see the results of the other tests that were done. Obviously, if there were tests that were subsequent to the DOJ negative that showed positive and that there was DNA, human DNA, that's a game changer.
It just seems to me that there would be nothing more important in this case than to put that DNA test at the top of the list and determine if it's Lacey's DNA or not. But are you telling me, Mark Aragos, that's not what's happening? It still could be weeks or months until anybody tests the DNA from that van?
I can't imagine. I haven't talked to them, but I can't imagine that isn't job one for the Innocence Project.
It just defies logic to me in all aspects. I have to wrap it there, but I'd really like to have both of you back because clearly the conversation between the two of you is fascinating, and I want to see more of it. Thank you so much, Brian Spitulski, for being on, and Mark Aragos as always. Yeah, go ahead.
The one thing I want to say is I have no dog in this fight. I don't care which way this goes, innocent or guilty. The important thing for me is that this is finally being looked at. Whether it leads to one thing or another, I sleep much better at night because people like you are now talking about it, and Mr. Garagos is now aware of it. So whatever comes of this, I don't care anymore, to be honest with you. I'll still talk to you, but I sleep better at night now that you guys are talking about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And you know what? Getting to the bottom of this is job number one for us as well. So I'm very thankful. Once again, Brian Spitulski and Mark Garagos, thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, still to come, a severed leg turns up on the western shore of Lake Michigan, and then more body parts start popping up around Milwaukee. Tonight, a suspect is in custody, and the question becomes, did police in the hometown of Jeffrey Dahmer just catch another serial killer? Former investigator on the Dahmer case is live with me next. I can think of a lot worse places to spend a spring afternoon than Warnemont Park on the western shore of Lake Michigan, just south of Milwaukee. There are trails and a dog run and a golf course. It's right on the water. It's beautiful. But on April 2nd, late in the afternoon, somebody in Warnemont Park saw something that should not have been there, a human leg. It was severed just below the hip, and there was pink nail polish on the toes. And a few hours later, a friend of a woman named Sade Robinson walked into a police precinct to report that Sade hadn't shown up for work, and Sade wasn't returning calls. And the last thing Robinson told her friend was how excited she was that she had a date planned. Cell phone records show that the date was taking place April 1st at a Milwaukee restaurant called the Twisted Fisherman. And sure enough, surveillance video at the Twisted Fisherman shows the couple showing up right on time at that restaurant's bar. Sade Robinson, 19 years old, and a tall, blonde man, later identified as 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson. That was the last time that Sade was ever seen alive. The following morning, Robinson's clothes were found in the trunk of her burned-out car. And on 4 separate days that week and the next, human remains and human flesh were found in separate locations in and around Milwaukee. The leg was just the starting point. On April 4th, police arrested Maxwell Anderson at a traffic stop. Here's Milwaukee County Sheriff Danita Ball.
The District Attorney's Office issued charges today against Maxwell Stephen Anderson for first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and arson of property other than building. He remains in custody.
Anderson appeared in court yesterday where prosecutors say they found blood in his home along with a, quote, sex dungeon. His bond is set at $5 million. I'm joined now by Steve Spingola, retired Milwaukee police detective and investigator on the Oxygen Channel's cold case. He worked extensively on the Jeffrey Dahmer investigation, which also happened in Milwaukee. Welcome to the program, Steve. I got to ask you, this is the same city. This is grisly. There's a sex dungeon. Does this feel a little like the Dahmer case?
First of all, thanks for having me. It does a little, but, when you take a look at the difference between Dahmer and Anderson, Dahmer was a lot more cunning. Anderson here, there's probably a history of mental illness. So you take a look, there's a treasure trove of forensic evidence that's left at his house and on video cameras and with witnesses. It's a little bit different than with Dahmer when you got to remember back to 1991, we didn't have any of that. But, there's always those connections, and people are still trying to link Dahmer to other crimes. One of those being Adam Walsh. But, Anderson here, he's just, I don't know, he is not quite as, charming and as intelligent as you would have expected him to be if he was a serial killer.
Well, I'll tell you, the violent past that we've tracked down of this guy is pretty overwhelming. In 2014, he had a disorderly conduct. He attacked his mom's fiance and stole a car and fled. In 2015, a domestic violence. While living with his grandparents, he smashed glass. He punched a hole in the wall when they suggested that he address his mental health. In 2019, he admitted to punching a man who tried to break up a fight between Anderson and a woman. This is the kind of guy that, you know, should be on people's radar. And shockingly, Sade was a criminal justice student. Are you surprised that maybe she didn't see red flags?
I teach criminal justice, and yes, I am. Usually there's situational awareness here, but, you know, she's a young girl. This older guy's interested in her. He's a bartender. That tells me a little bit about his personality. He's got that gift of gab. And wherever they crossed their paths, she was obviously smitten with him, goes on this date. And let's face it, she's the victim here. There's one bad guy. I don't like it when we blame the victim, but, you know, you wonder what went on that night and how she winds up over at his house and eventually dismembered.
Yeah, and who knows if it's him. This is an allegation at this point. It's looking pretty strong, though, the evidence. Listen, thank you for all of this. We'll continue to watch this case. It's so distressing. But Steve Spingola, it's good to have you on. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, still to come, will O.J. Simpson do in death what he never did in life for the families of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson? Will he pay for the murders that one jury cleared him of, but another jury found him liable for? Because that bill has been growing in the last 3 decades. And I've got 100 million reasons why they might actually see some money. That's next.
Europe on a Viking longship, you'll spend less time getting there and more time being there. Viking, exploring the world in comfort.
A recurring theme from our coverage last night of the death of O.J. Simpson was how little closure it offers anybody. Cato Kalin said it in our live interview. Ron Goldman's father, Fred Goldman, said it to me on the phone. And of course, they're right. But there will be a final accounting, and some very old debts may be at least partially settled. Not talking about cosmic justice here. I'm talking about probate, money. The Goldman family and the family of Nicole Brown Simpson may be first in line to claim whatever assets Simpson managed to hide or hold on to. And that's because the 1997 civil trial that found Simpson liable for Nicole and Ron's murders, even though he was acquitted in the criminal trial. The jury awarded those families $33.5 million to go up by 10% every year that it was not paid. Well, it's into the 9 figures now, well over $100 million. So what exactly does O.J.'s estate consist of? His Brentwood home, where the bloody socks were found, that was sold back in 1998. His longtime Miami home, bought in 2000, that was lost to foreclosure. But his Las Vegas home in a gated golf course community, that one is worth well over $2 million. There are also reports of offshore bank accounts and possibly, nobody knows for sure, a hidden trove of sports memorabilia, O.J. stuff. And we know that stuff was valuable. Valuable enough, at least to O.J. Simpson in 2007, that he committed multiple felonies to get it back from the hangers-on who stole it from a storage unit. We also can't forget Simpson's 4 children, who in a normal family would rightly expect to divvy up their parents' assets. So what will this final earthly accounting of O.J. Simpson look like? For that, I turn to one of the smartest legal minds on television today. It's NewsNation's legal contributor, Jesse Weber. Hey, Jesse, so they are the first, right? Like, why is it that they're first in line before any other debtor, the Goldmans and the Browns?
Hey, Ashleigh. So, yeah, they're called secured creditors, right? They have an interest in the assets. And as secured creditors, because they got a judgment, they're at the front of the line in the probate process. So if you're talking about domestic bank accounts, if you're talking about personal property like those memorabilia, in theory, they would be the first to get it. The problem, of course, Ashleigh, is we don't know full accounting. So if he transferred assets to, let's say, an irrevocable trust, that now belongs to the beneficiary. Creditors can't go after that. You talked about offshore bank accounts. But by the way, he would have had to report it under law about having those offshore bank accounts. It's not impossible for creditors to get that money, but my gosh, is it complicated and very costly to do that. So there are ways that they might be able to get money. There's ways they might go to the top of the line, but we just right now don't know the full accounting of O.J. Simpson's estate.
So let's talk about that $2 million home in Vegas. From my understanding, Vegas is in Nevada. Nevada is another homestead state, just like Florida. And, that's why he wanted to set up there, so that nobody could ever come after his homestead. Well, he's gone. Does homestead pass down to descendants, to children, or does homestead end with the homeowner?
So you're right. There is a homestead exemption, right, that would normally creditors wouldn't be able to get it. And really the way you'd have to show that is that it is a residence currently for somebody in his family. So, for example, if it was a wife or his children, they would have to make a claim to it. And if really no one is living there and no one's using it, in theory, it could be sold off and maybe go to the judgment. But right now, it would be up to the children, it seems, by all accounts, to try to make a claim to that house first.
Okay, so then next, I watched him in Airplane, and I know how the movies work. You usually get residuals for the actors that, are in perpetuity. What about any earnings that his estate might continue to make after his death? How can the Goldmans get at that?
So it's a tricky situation. I actually thought about the same thing with his NFL pension. And you talk about it. Sometimes these pensions or these residuals will happen. They continue even after death. Some happen or cease during death. There's a claim that I wonder if his heirs or his children could make, that this is now going to my benefit. I am the beneficiary of this. I shouldn't have a claim. No one should have a claim to what I'm receiving. I would think, though, that creditors, secured creditors, like the Goldmans and the Browns, would be able to ultimately say, wait a minute, that was money that was owed to us. And I don't know if it's obviously that much money. Remember, they said this isn't about the money per se. This is about holding him accountable. And in death, is it a way to hold him accountable some way? It's hard to say. It's more of a moral, ethical question than it is really a financial question.
Yeah, and I keep wondering about the troves of memorabilia. I've only got 10 seconds left, but if they find troves of memorabilia in all those storage units that he used to use, I'm assuming that the Goldmans get that, because you got to satisfy judgments. You can't just pass it on as inheritance. I got 10 seconds.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I think you nailed it right on the head. The fact that he went to the length to try to get it back says something about the value of it. And by the way, when someone dies like him, the value of that goes up. Unfortunately, that's just the way society works.
It's just the way it is. Jesse Weber, thank you for being here on this Friday night. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, friend.
You too. Good seeing you.
Okay, you too. And I'll have you back early and often. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for being here on Friday night with me. I'm now going to start my weekend. I don't know about you, but cheers. I'll see you on Monday, and stay tuned for Cuomo. There's no liquor in that, trust me.
Hey, I'm Chris Cuomo. Happy Friday. You got an upgrade last night with Geraldo, the one and only, and of course he won the night. We'll be back later in the show. He's going to be discussing with me the controversy surrounding the O.J. trial and whether he agrees with me that we are about to relive a similar drama starting Monday. So let me set the table, a little food for thought. Here's how I see it. I think O.J. did it. I think the civil case got it right. And I think the criminal case